I think the topic of the day is kind of what's going on within our livestock industry, and probably more specifically the cattle industry, and then how that is going to trickle down to some farm production decisions that are going to ultimately be made, or in most cases already being made at the moment, and how, as livestock producers, we're going to survive what we're going through. And so, just a little bit of background. I think it's important to know kind of where we've came from to figure out where we're going. And so, right now, of course, the biggest news being made of the day is the short. Everybody's saying we're going to have a meat shortage coming up, and what we're really talking about is slaughter capacity, right? And so, nationally, we have got a certain amount of companies that process livestock. And when that supply chain gets disrupted, as it has with the COVID-19, there's a certain trickle down effect. And so the biggest trickle down effect that we're having right now is that meat prices, retail meat prices, have exponentially went up into levels that we really have never seen before. Although while that's happening, the farmer or the producer is getting less and less of that share all the time. And in this case, we've seen live cattle markets tumble about 28, 30% off of just even the more recent highs of just a couple months ago. And so, the question begs why. I mean, what is the root cause of all that? And like I said just a minute ago, a lot of that goes back to slaughter capacity. Uh, and I would probably argue a little bit that the vertically integrated chain that we've had move through the livestock sector, more so in swine or poultry. But even in the beef world, right now we've got about four major companies or four meat packers that control about 85% of that slaughter capacity, and really that live meat, or the meat market on the resulting side. And so uh, there is a lot of talk right now in the industry of the effects of that, and this isn't the first. This isn't something new, actually. If anybody's read their history books, Teddy Roosevelt was the first president to break up the meat packer trust, and at that time, interestingly enough, the few amount of companies that there were controlled about 50% of slaughter capacity, and therefore meat marketing on the other end. And fast forward about 115 years now from the Sherman Antitrust Acts, and now we've got fewer in number that are controlling 85%. And so there's a lot of people going, scratching their heads as to how healthy that is for the industry. And so when we talk about price cycles in the cattle world, we generally have went on a 10-year price cycle. And so depending on where you're at in that price cycle, it takes about 5 years from the high to the low, and then another 5 years to get back. And so we saw the last cycle peaked in about 2014. If anybody remembers the prices that we experienced then, it was I think at the high, fat cattle traded at $1.71 on a live weight price, and that's not an in the meat price. That's a live weight price of about $1.71. It's about where it topped out at in 2014. And so, just to give you a little bit of context, cash trade this week is going to probably fall somewhere between about $96 and $98, and so we're not quite half of those highs. While on the other end, the boxed beef side, meat getting sold to retailers has went up exponentially compared to even 2014 highs. And so, it really begs different. What's that mean long term? What are the long term effects of this? And I think, there probably are going to be many. I have probably a few ideas, and some might agree and some might disagree with them. But uh, when we really look about some of the other dynamics that are in play here, and we talk about the age of the farmer a lot, and how that age keeps creeping up. And actually, nationally, you look at that, I believe it's in the upper 50s for 57, 8 years old, thereabouts. Last time I looked, if you look and you boil that down to the livestock sector, it's actually into the 60s, into the low 60s for average age. And so, what's that going to mean moving forward? We have got a business that has to continue. It has to continue at every level, and including at the, it starts at the cow-calf level. And so when you look at what are those barriers to entry, what are those things that people that are my age or really even younger than that, what are they going to experience moving forward, and how are we going to transfer that huge capital investment that is required for a young producer to get into the business. And I think, as we look forward, the landscape for that looks very interesting, and it almost would look a lot like what the hogs and chickens went through about 30 or 35 years ago, and that we're experiencing quite a bit of, I think the terminology is backwards integration in the livestock industry. And like I said, the poultry and the swine already moved through that. And the crux to that, the key to that, is that those farm level prices have to get to a point where it's unsustainable. I mean, when you cannot pay your bills at the farm level by what you're receiving for your livestock, that's where it breaks you. And we're there. We are there right now, and the price just kind of keeps getting worse, and the longer this goes on, I think the more you have to consider that that backwards integration model for livestock producers might become a reality. Krisha, can you share that Excel spreadsheet that I had sent you?
Yes. I'm sharing it right now.
So I'll kind of
Everybody see it?
wait for that to get up on the screen. And so I get a lot of phone calls from people, and we're at an interesting time. And so usually in the depths of despair is opportunity. And had some people call me and said, cattle prices are fairly low, interest is really cheap. Is this the time at which I need to be trying to expand to take advantage of what might be a rally point into the future? And so I just, this is what I would call cowboy math a little bit. This is the kind of math you do on the back of an envelope. But I got basically three different columns there, and this is all taken a little bit off of or modeled after our beef budgets. If anybody has not in the beef cattle business, not familiar with those, you can get those off online if you just search for MU beef budgets. And if you haven't looked at those, I guarantee your lender has looked at those because I is more of those, and I know a lot of those, but they all say that they use those as the basis of a lot of their decision making. But when you look at some of the what I would call really out-of-pocket expenses to running a beef operation, I mean, and I was putting some fairly real numbers to this. And if you just look at that first column, the high input expansion number, and this is, this would represent a number of, okay, I want to expand. I can find the cows. I can actually find the pasture. There are a lot of people that are willing to do, per head per day sorts of caretaking. And that first column would just be, if I was the owner of the cows, what's that math really look like? And so, I figure 7 months of pasture at $1.75 a pair. You can see what that kind of leads to. Winter feeding at around $2 a day for the rest of the winter. And again, this is for somebody else doing that. And you're probably going to pay them a certain amount to calve them. You're going to have a certain amount of vet bills and replacements because they're not all going to breed, and you're going to have some breeding costs, some trucking costs, some operating interest there. And when you look at as far as a cow payment, amortized over 5 years, and the low amount of interest that is, that $453 represents what we would have to pay if we were going to buy that animal. And so the bottom line is you got to sell a product off of that animal of about $1,600 in that system, okay, to break even. There's absolutely no way you can't do it. Don't care how long you own the animal. That's not even attainable right now. So if you look at the middle column of that, and that would kind of consider, okay, instead of paying somebody else to do a lot of the work, we can find some pasture to rent. The winter feed bill's still going to be there. A lot of those other expenses we can kind of play with a little bit to lower our costs. But again, got to buy the animal, got to pay the interest on it. And so, we significantly can reduce the cost there, but at $1,183 per cow, there's no way we can defray that amount of cost. Even to, there is absolutely no way we can generate that amount of money on an animal to offset that cost. So expansion at this point, it's just the economics don't even do it. And so, the interesting thing is, so if you look at and I don't mean to by calling that one old farmer math, I don't want to offend anybody, but I get this question a lot too, that well, I already own the land, I bought it 50 years ago, it's paid for. We're going to zero that column out. We're not going to charge ourselves to calve these animals. For replacements, we're not going to keep any of our replacement stock because we can go buy old cows or something at a lot cheaper cost to keep the factory going per se. And we might borrow bulls, and we might borrow somebody's truck and trailer to get stuff around, and we're not going to borrow any money because we're in a lot more financially sound position. And you take all that out and you say, well, if you just completely out of pocket cost, not considering opportunity cost, but just out of pocket cost, that figure is fairly low. But I would say that's also for a generation of individuals that have a lot of their stuff paid for. And so you're working with a lot of different sets of math. And the only reason I show that is because I had a friend, a guy that calls me quite often, and he kind of falls into that generation of about he's going to turn 70 this year, and so he sold these fall calves the other day, sold them all, didn't wean them. He doesn't do it. Gave them one round of vaccine and shipped them to town, and steers, heifers, the whole works. He brought home $725 a head. And so you look at that and you say, well, under his system, I guess he made a little bit of money. I don't know if what kind of return to asset value that is. I would say it's quite low considering what a lot of our inputs are worth today, but he tended to make money. But it depends on which side of the fence you're looking at. As I guess the bottom line is, it depends on which side of the fence you're looking at as to what are those production decisions I'm going to have to change in light of a lot of this that's going on. And is expansion even in the, for somebody that's young and looking to expand, is expansion even in the cards right now? And I would say probably not. I mean, and everybody's situation is different. Maybe you're not trying to expand with $2,000 heifer pairs, as I've used in our model per se. But I think one of the important things, one of the important take-home things, and I'll kind of get down to it in what I consider are my, three big drivers of profitability. If you're not keeping track, that's going to be step number one. And so again, this is just a real simple kind of an illustration of just three different viewpoints and kind of how to break down and look at what the future might look like in the midst of our current situation, and the kind of math that we really need to be doing, so that basically we're not paying $600 or $700 out of pocket just to say we're in the cow-calf business. And so, Krish, I think I'm kind of done with that. If you want to take that down at any point, that'll be fine. And so, um, we talked about, the capital investment looks tremendous. It's a really tough time to expand, and that's really nothing new. That's kind of been the same way for a long time. I think when we look at some of the things that are going on within our industry, our current trends, politics that are going on, there's a lot of different things being thrown around of how can we fix this. Of course, I don't know, if anybody's listening to a lot of these different organizations that are coming up with potential solutions, but mandatory livestock reporting is coming up for renewal this fall, and they're thinking that's the chance to kind of get actually something done with this. And a lot of the root of the problem in the beef cattle sector is, when we go to trading calves or trading yearlings, a lot of times it's in a sale barn setting where we really see what we would call true price discovery. When those animals move into the feed yards, and then ultimately get sold to a packing plant, we don't ever see true price discovery again. It's not a competitive market by and large. That's a big sweeping statement, but in this country, we really, when you look at the northern tiers of the livestock trade for finished animals, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, you see a lot more cash trade in the northern parts versus the southern parts. When you go to looking at Kansas, or at least the southern parts of Kansas, anywhere in Oklahoma, Texas mainly, where you've got a huge amount of what they would call formula-based cattle or contracted cattle. And so, since it is against the law for a packing company to physically own cattle in a feedlot, what they've done is they've sold off those holdings to companies that guarantee them to supply them a certain number of live animals for processing. And so, when you look at that formula-based pricing structure, that's not true price discovery. It's really not even close. But those prices, those what they call formula trading prices, get priced off of the limited amount of cash trade that happens. And so, I think one of the more important things about this to note is, markets must work efficiently. Okay, I mean, when you get a lot of outside influence in the markets, they don't work efficiently. They don't do true price discovery. They don't do a lot of things that Carisha or Wesley can speak better of than I can. But when you go down that road of not very good price discovery, and you do what we call formula trading, that all gets based off of a limited cash trade. And then you start to see things, you get kickbacks at the end. A packer would give a bonus as long as you fulfill the terms of the contract, and that stuff never gets reported within mandatory price reporting. And so that's when I talk about a lot of those political undercurrents that are happening right now. We just need more transparency in the cash trade market, or in all of our trading markets, actually. And so when you look at some of these things that are being floated of minimum mandatory 50% cash trade, 30% cash trade, and I'm probably not smart enough to tell you what is right, other than it's a broken system now. And if you're wanting to get into the movement, let your voice be heard, I would encourage anybody to reach out to folks and kind of dig a little deeper in what this means, as far as if we mandate a 30% cash trade or a 50% cash trade, because I do think we're at a point where something will get done eventually, politically, right, wrong, or indifferent. Maybe it'll be better, maybe it'll be worse, I don't know. But if that's if you're struggling from the farm level, I think at some point you've got to get involved. and educate yourself on what's going on so that you can be a part of that political process. But I'll digress a little bit on that, and I want to leave a lot of time for questions. And so I know I went through that portion of this very fast, and we can get into a further discussion. But the flip side of what I was asked to talk about a little bit was, what does that look like from a farm level decision making? And I always say, if anybody hears me talk about it, it's really hard when you're in the midst of it all to say, what can I do differently now? And those farm level management decision changes don't necessarily lead to more money in my pocket right now. But I think it's important, if we're going to stay in business, if that's our goal, is to stay in business long term, what are those things that we can do or should be doing that we're not doing? And I'm not, trying to pick on and say nobody's doing these things, because there are operations that do these things very well, and there are operations that could improve a lot on these things. And so I've come up with basically three things to talk about that I think are bigger drivers of profitability as we look at the cow calf or the stocker, or really any sort of beef model. These things could kind of fall in line. Of course, Missouri is a cow calf state, but my first one of those, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, is accurate record keeping. Uh, and I know a lot of different operations, and this is a struggle. And not that we don't keep very good records; it's that they usually don't make it all in the same place, right? I mean, they're on the dashboard of our pickups, or in our shops, or we filed them away somewhere and probably can't find it if you're anything like me. And so finding ways at which to really keep accurate records. And I'll give you a for instance, okay? And so, there's the old saying that says, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? And so I would give you another quote and say, can you trace profit back to the factory? What does that mean? Can anybody really tell me what if that cow is being profitable for them or not? Okay, so I'll give you an example. Just sold last of a group of fat cattle here about a month ago. That wasn't a real pleasant experience, as you can imagine. But I love the record keeping part of that. I love being able to trace back individually and say, what did each individual animal bring back to me in terms of money, and what did they cost me? And so what I would call my bottom third of that particular group, the ones that lost money, lost about $80 a head. The top 2/3 of that group that actually made a little bit of money made about $120 a head. Okay. So you're talking about two groups of animals that all came from the same herd, and at the end of the day, they netted me, a difference of $200 a head. High to low, the most profit earning animal I had, from the one that lost me the most money, was about $600 a head. Same herd, very similar genetics, same kind of sires. And so I know that because I followed those animals all the way to the finish line, and I got back individual measurements on that. And so, and I'm not advocating that's for everybody. There's a lot of risk when you take that sort of a marketing step. But I share with you that experience to say that what kind of records are you keeping? What kind of records should you be keeping to see if that calf has returned you a profit? I shared with you, my friend, the other day sold his fall calves, and what he has is that on average, he got back $725 a head. I would probably contend that there's a third of those cows out there that lost him a bunch of money, and there's 2/3 of that probably either broke even or made him some money as far as what he spent on those. And being able to find those animals is a big step. And that takes, if your cows aren't individually identified, that's that's the necessary first step before we even start talking about other record keeping programs. But being able to track that and along with some other production decisions is kind of number one if you look at drivers of profitability. My second one I'll talk a little bit about is how we manage our grass. And if you are not a rotational grazer, you're leaving money on the table, and we can show that time and time and time again. The secret to growing grass, it's not necessarily the type of grass you've got, or the fertilizer, or the lime. All those things are important. The real secret to growing grass is how much rest you can give it. Now, obviously, those fields that are more fertile have more rain. They might need a little less rest than those that aren't, but the important part of that is being able to rest it. And so more days of grazing also obviously is going to equal less cost at the end of the day. And, something that we don't talk a lot about is how we manage our grass might change our marketing model. And I'll be one of those to say that I'm an advocate for fall calving cows. I'm not going to say that's for those. Of course, I'm sitting up here north of I-70 and really north of Highway 36. About everybody around here is a mixed model. We have row crops, we have cows, and so that creates a lot of opportunity, obviously, from a feed resource perspective. But when we look at the fall calving versus spring calving, I really think if we're going to look at things that try to take risk out of the marketplace, and there's so much risk that we face, I think we have to ask ourselves from a production setting, how much of that risk can we defer? And the real key to managing your risk is diversification. And so those fall calving animals, when we wean those, might tend to hit a little better market, obviously, but it would also give us an opportunity. Instead of selling 30-day, 45-day weaned calves, maybe we can sell short yearlings or even full yearlings, depending on how we allocate our pasture. But that takes grass management, and it takes maybe doing things differently than they always have been. Now, the thing that I always hear about a spring calving herd is, especially up here where we do a lot of farming, is that we can calve those cows in January or February or March when we're not farming and spread our labor pool out. And that's, I can't deny that. That's certainly something that you have to take into consideration. But I just think there's so much more opportunity from a risk management standpoint of spreading those calves out so that they're not all hitting that marketplace at the same time in the fall. And really the third thing that I would talk about is, we talk a lot about marketing our cattle. We probably don't, as a whole, as a big sweeping comment, we're probably not as active as maybe we should be in the marketing side of things, because by and large we are price takers. But really we're low cost producers. I mean, it's a low cost business model, and so you have to look at the cost side, and that's where the accurate record keeping comes into play at. I would advocate there are things that we can do if we're going to try to make investments into an operation. I would always tell anybody, never ask yourself, if you're going to spend $1, is it going to return you at least that dollar back? And if it's not going to do that, then why? It's just recreational spending at that point. And so you take every line item and you start with the biggest ones, and most of those are feed cost items. How can you take that feed cost down significantly in a lot of cases? And some of the most successful producers I know can store commodity feeds. They buy them when they're cheaper, and they have a fixed feed cost. If nothing else, it gives you less risk that you're not, depending on how much feed you need, that you're not at risk of the fluctuations of cash markets. I don't call the feed company every week or every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks and did feed go up or down? I can control those sorts of costs. And yeah, that takes a management leap. It takes some investment and some resources, uh, but I think those resources can, if if you spend $1, will it return you more than $1? I think smartly, absolutely, it will. And I'll just share a little personal experience, and I'm one that tries to buy feed and store it when it's cheaper, and my feed cost through the whole winter of 2019 and 2020 ran about $135 to $40 a ton. Of course, I would call around, kind of get that same mix or ration at a feed store, just to comparatively priced. And at the highest, it was a little over $200 a ton. And so, you know, I managed that risk. I deferred that risk by making those decisions to store feed when it was cheaper. I've had to make some investments to do that, but I believe over time it does that. And I would also say, if you're in a mixed model of row crops and livestock, I think you need to look at your row crop side of your operation and how can you use that side to enhance the livestock side. And so if you're not doing cover crops, I think you need to. I think as a row crop farmer, if you're and a livestock farmer, if you're not doing things like growing wheat, and I mean growing wheat to sell wheat as a cash crop, so that you can get a cover crop in there in a timely manner and be able to graze it or bale it or chop it or whatever it might be. I think the days at which you can use and stored feed and take that off of the bill on the livestock side, I think you can attribute that. And I know something like wheat is not a big cash money crop like corn or soybeans are. But I think when you look at it from a total approach, the other thing, I know guys that, of course, you got to get pretty far north in Missouri, but still grow oats. Again, oats is not a real good cash crop, but it's a wonderful feed source. And a lot of those guys are double cropping beans after those oats and still getting 25, 30, even upwards to 40 bushel on a fantastic year. But so if you're in that northern echelon of Missouri, can you look at some of those little more older fashioned, maybe not quite as attractive field crops as opportunities to enhance the livestock side of your operation? And so those are kind of my thoughts as to some of the drivers of profitability that we really need to be taking some serious look at as livestock producers as we move forward. Krisha, I mean, that's kind of what I had, and I know, 35 or 40 minutes is what you were thinking. And so I don't know if that spurs any discussion, if anybody has any burning questions or even really specific questions. If you want to get into some very specific questions related to production resources, we can talk about those.
The questions.
Maybe I've put everybody to sleep.
No. So Zach, how, at least for our area, how have the sales been? I know it was a couple weeks ago. I'd heard from some folks that said that it was down in Pike County, had taken some cattle to a sale barn and they were turned away and told them to take them home. Um, what are you hearing kind of as a whole around the region or
Well,
in the state?
so I maybe haven't quite heard that, unless possibly they were finished cattle. I mean, I could probably see that from just because the supply chain has been so disrupted. There may not be a buyer for finished cattle, and those might get turned away. As far as cash feeder cattle or calves, we've seen a little bit of strengthening in the market over the last couple of weeks. Of course, we've just the previous 6 weeks, or at least 4 weeks before that, we were pretty much in a free fall. And you saw that from livestock receipts. Last cattle on feed report came out, and we put about 77% of year ago levels, which equated to about, I don't remember, I did the math, 400,000 or 500,000 in the 5 area feed region. So dealt with a lot of producers that were trying to hold cattle longer, trying to basically wait out and see if a lot of this COVID stuff would clear, and there might be some strengthening to the cash market. They're starting to break loose now, and I think it's just it's just kind of where we're at. Producers have looked at these prices for the last 2 or 3 weeks, saying this is just what it is, and I'm just going to have to take my beating and go on. But it's just when we talk about the risk management factor, and that's something I really didn't talk about, but if you look at these cash calf or feeder cattle markets, those things vary widely from week to week. I mean, $15 to $20 a hundred even sometimes can vary from week to week depending on the outside factors that have come into play. And so that it's a stressful point to even know when to try or how to pull the trigger. And I don't have any good answers for that. I mean, you've got some risk management tools, livestock risk insurance. I would probably argue that none of them work very well. I think a lot of that just goes back to the fact that futures markets, is another broken system. We've always looked at futures markets to try to figure out where livestock prices were headed or what things were worth. And I mean, you had a convergence for April fat cattle that the markets didn't even converge at the end of the month. I mean, cash ran at such a premium to where futures were, they didn't even come together. And so that's the biggest sign of just a broken system. And I know it's probably a blip in time. It's in the short run, but when all of our risk management tools from a livestock side are based off of futures markets that I would probably argue are broken, it just becomes very hard to try to defer any risk anywhere else. And so I would go back to those production decisions that, if those abilities to hold cattle longer, to have extra grass to graze them, to have low enough feed costs that you can afford to hold those cattle longer, those are more sound risk management strategies that I would invest in. And I think, most bankers probably would too if the financial plan was sound enough. I mean, those are the types of investments that I think are going to return, you money year over year versus I'm going to buy insurance this year because that's the only option I have available to me. And, I don't know. I don't know if that was the answer that you were kind of hinting at. I don't know. I mean, I don't know in the cattle world that there's been anybody turned away unless it was fat cattle. And that we just don't trade a lot of fat cattle in auction markets. We trade a few, and I would not doubt that those could have been turned away at some point because we don't have anywhere to get rid of them at.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hi, this is Tina. Still didn't get my video working, but I sell feeder cattle. I have a little under 100 head. I just sold cattle about 3 weeks ago, and that was probably the most painful experience I've had in years. Even with the livestock risk protection insurance, which that was crap. Anyhow, pardon that French. But with the packing plants, I understand where they are struggling with COVID and those kind of things. But come the fall, once the the thing, the restaurants start opening and the schools potentially start going back, I mean, I know we don't have a crystal ball, but shouldn't things kind of turn around? I would think by the fall, there's going to have to be some kind of market demand that kind of helps out the cattle industry. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I know where Tyson is terminating contracts. I'm in central Missouri. Tyson just terminated contracts for 20 turkey farmers in my area. And I know they're having struggles with the other, with the chicken, the poultry industry. But I would just think when it comes to the beef market, I mean, surely there's got to be a little positive towards the fall, unless there's something I'm not seeing. I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So that's an excellent question, Tina, and I feel for you. I have taken those baths before in the market, and they're just about like a gut punch. You probably won't forget it anytime soon, but eventually you'll get over it. You'll have to. But to go on with your question, I think fundamentals moving forward do look a lot more in the favor. I mean, I've said this a lot, and my crystal ball's broken, and don't take this as marketing advice at all. I think when we do bounce, it's going to be a significant bounce. I just don't know when that is. And the one caveat to that is, how long are we going to run below kill levels moving forward? And just strictly speaking on the beef side of things, because what we're doing, we still have our numbers of fed cattle are still not in our favor. There's still a lot of them out there. There's still a lot of them that are going to be market ready over the next 3 to 4 months. And what you do when you keep running, below those levels at which we need to stay current in our inventory, when you start running behind, you make cattle bigger. Carcass weights increase, and we're seeing that, which just means more meat in the marketplace. And so, what I would have hoped would have been what you were alluding to, a bounce this fall into the cattle market. I don't know. I'm becoming increasingly skeptical as the days go forward that we're actually going to see that bounce even anytime in 2020. Just because there's been such a disruption in that supply chain. If that keeps dragging on, and we keep seeing these plants run under capacity, we just keep backing those cattle up further, and they just become more numerous. They become heavier, and it's harder for the marketplace to stay current with the levels that are out there. And so, I can't help but think the way you do that, when we don't return to some sort of normalcy, but we're just going to have that lag effect, I think, in the marketplace of those cattle that have gotten heavier. They're still out there. I mean, you look at what hogs and chickens are doing. They're digging mass graves. That's going to be really hard. I mean, it's hard enough to do for those animals, but to start burying, 1,400 pound fat steers, boy, I don't know who's going to foot that bill, but I don't know that anybody's really going to want to do that very bad. And, the other part is, when you look at demand elasticity, how many people are going to lose their jobs moving forward? Are we going to have a large unemployment rate moving forward? Beef's a luxury item. I mean, when you go to looking at protein needs, it's if you want something that actually tastes good, you go buy beef. But the longer the economic struggles as a whole drag out, the more that's just going to drag, on everything. And so, I would still say that at some point it's going to become in our favor. I seriously doubt it's going to happen any sooner than we really want it to, for sure. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but those are just my thoughts on.
Yes, thank you. I do appreciate it. I have made an appointment with our with a butcher because I've got so many people in this area have been laid off,
Mm-hmm.
and you go to the grocery store and there literally is there's in central Missouri there's no meat in the cases. There's no beef, there's no pork, there's no chicken. I don't know where it all went, but it's not there. And now people are being laid off, so they're reaching out to the local farmers like me to ask if we're going to be doing any butchering of our own and sell it individually that route.
Sure.
And so I've given that some serious consideration on a way to possibly change my business model and bring in more cash flow. I did work cattle this past Wednesday, and I thought I had some cattle that probably would come open, and I thought, okay, Eunice, you're gonna become hamburger, but I'll be doggone if every one of those ladies didn't end up pregnant. So I might have to change that model too. So I don't know. We haven't put a crop in the ground yet, so I know we will. You were talking about keeping an eye on your feed costs, and I mean, we will definitely be producing all our own cattle feed this winter, but it's definitely making me crunch a lot more numbers than I have before. But I do appreciate your input, though.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you're doing the math, it. And I've had a lot of these questions. This high meat price, we can make all sorts of money. That meat price can come down about as fast as it went up, and it is extremely hard at the farm level to compete with operations of scale. I mean, when they can do it just so much cheaper and the product becomes cheaper, the marketplace for that can go away quickly. So I have a lot of those conversations, and I would say it is an avenue to diversify your marketing stream, but it takes a lot of freezer space, and it's a perishable commodity, so you gotta take all that into account, that you could move that. Not to mention the federal regulations of finding some slaughter places that will kill that and allow you to sell it as inspected products. So anyways, not to get off topic, but yeah, had a lot of those conversations lately too.
Yeah. Also, just to check to see from some of the local butcher shops that slaughter around our area, a lot of them are getting booked out like 3 months even. Just personally, we don't raise cattle, but we do uh, finish out a few steers every year for our own consumption and then family members. And we barely got ours in. And we take them down to Macon, and they said they were booked solid. So,
yeah. So and a lot of that is if you have the ability to take a live hog, there's a lot of people that are giving them away, and if you can find a place to go with those, that's and so those spots are getting taken up pretty fast, and the fact that meat prices at the counter have went up so much, it is a lot cheaper to, if you have the ability to store it by a quarter or a half.
any other questions for Zach? Going back to what you were talking about, Tina, thinking about diversifying, I think that's something a lot of people have on their minds, thinking of ways that what can we do different, what ways can we add value. So it's perhaps a topic for another lunch and learn in the future. And I meant to tell everybody at the start, but we do have a chat option. If you don't want to talk, or maybe you're having trouble with your microphone, you can type out your question in the chat box, and Zach and I will be able to see it. Well, Zach, would you care if I shared your email perhaps in the chat box, so if anybody had questions for you later, they could contact you directly?
Not at all. That's what I'm here for.
So if everybody can see the chat box, I've got Zach's contact information in there. Feel free to contact him or myself if you need further information. And if there are not any other questions, we'll go ahead and adjourn today. But really appreciate you all joining us. I hope you learned something. I hope we've given you some things to think about, Zach. It was I really enjoyed your discussion presentation today. I know I learned some things, and you've left me with a few points to ponder. So I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you having me. I'm happy to do it.
Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Good weekend. Enjoy the weather.